It's just devastating to watch your lives go away in dumpsters. Sorry.
I honestly was saying every prayer I knew.
Homes destroyed, lives upended as water rushes in.
I've been whitewater rafting. It reminded me of that.
Where there was never water before.
We've been here since '99. It's just gotten worse and worse as the years have gone on.
The big question.
It's a scary trend and one that we can't escape from.
Why are Middle Tennessee homes now flooding, but didn't in the past?
Well, I'm shocked. I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
The News 4 Investigates team uncovers the astonishing changes to the Middle Tennessee landscape.
We can no longer continue to rely on historic data.
What our investigation found is causing the crisis.
Our neighbors are going under every time we have a fast, furious, frequent flooding event, which happens more than frequently now.
And the failures that's letting it happen.
What do you say to these homeowners? Is the message right now, you're just going to have to sit and wait?
This is Troubled Waters, Heightened Risk. August 21st, 2021, 17 inches of rain fell on the Humphreys County town of Waverly. It would become the deadliest one-day flood in the state's history, costing Michelle Feliciano her 7-year-old daughter.
I constantly remember hearing my daughter's last call out for me, and I couldn't get her.
Ryan Rigney, who lost his twins that day, was completely caught off guard.
We didn't even get a notification that there was a flood coming.
The reason? Cell service had gone down in parts of Humphreys County, meaning phones throughout the area received none of the National Weather Service's 4 flood emergency alerts.
If we had a better warning to get out of there, our babies would still be here with us.
Adding further complications, the unexpected speed of the rising water.
Like a dam broke, it just rose. It rose quickly, and maybe a dam breaking would be a sudden rush, but it was a quick rise of water in town.
Waverly is no stranger to flooding. Sitting right along Trace Creek, the town has flooded 4 times since 2010. Lindsay Daniel has experienced so many floods. She knew this time something was different.
Every other flood we've had time to get our stuff and get out without rushing.
Even emergency responders were astonished.
What did you think when you were driving here?
Why is there water here now?
Quickly after the flood, News 4 Investigates learned law enforcement was looking closely at this stretch of railroad. You can see where Trace Creek runs underneath. The Swift Water Rescue team told us water may have pooled behind where the railroad stood on high elevation, almost like a levee. And when the earth beneath the railroad broke through, it sent torrents of water suddenly flooding anything downstream.
This is what bothers me. Did these people die because of that rush of water, or was it the gradual rise?
There was no gradual rise to this. Up in one of these flood areas, it went from bone dry to waist deep water in somewhere probably less than 15 minutes.
To try and understand what happened, News 4 Investigates launched our drone and found this. Look, in 2 sections, water rushed through, leaving only the railroad itself standing.
It was blown out up here as well.
The sheriff's office found the same breaks when they examined both satellite maps and the terrain where the surge rushed through.
This is not just a backflow of water that's causing this right here. That had to be some force and some power.
Security cameras confirmed it too. One man's camera showed that the water swallowed his house in under 12 minutes, trapping he and his family.
It was so quick, like you think you got enough time to get in your truck and leave, and you don't. And you think you got enough time to go from my house to Main Street, which is probably, 200-300 yards, if that. You just don't have time.
And this camera showed the same in downtown Waverly. The force of the water strong enough to carry a car and send a roof floating by, all in just minutes.
The water still was rising so fast that my husband actually had to bust out the back window just to let the water flow through, and so we wasn't trapped in there.
As surprised as victims were, we uncovered the county officials knew the creek would likely flood. Look at this. 10 years earlier, a report commissioned by Humphreys County officials identified that creek was one of the local hazards for potential deadly flooding. The creek has long been clogged by vegetation and gravel, making it prone to flooding. But look, the report reads, no action was ever taken.
There will be people that say, you knew that this was going to happen. You knew that this could be this bad. Why didn't you clear that creek?
There are a lot of factors that have impeded any progress toward what we know is the major cause of this chronic flooding.
To clear the creek, the county would have had to request permits from the State Department of Environment and Conservation. The state confirms no permit was ever pulled.
TDEC has said no one ever came to us for permits. Nobody asked for this. Why didn't you ask?
The permits are limited in scope.
That's where County Executive Jesse Wallace says the problem truly lies, that the permits are so limited they couldn't have made substantial clearing. For example, the county says before 1980, they used bulldozers to clear the creek, but the state permits now don't allow heavy machinery in the creek itself.
Regulatory restrictions are the biggest problem that we have.
News4 Investigates repeatedly emailed and called TDEC, but our requests for an interview were denied. The state agency writing in part, there are many mitigation efforts, such as removing trash and woody debris by hand or chainsaw that would not require any sort of permit. But Wallace says that would have only made a dent in the problem that has already proven to be deadly.
This was a man-made tidal wave. That's right, man-made tidal wave that came into this town, changing the lives of everyone forever.
9 months after the flood, families sued CSX Railroad, citing our findings in the lawsuit, claiming the railroad failed to clear debris from their culvert at Trace Creek, essentially clogging the creek and backing up behind their tracks. And when the water burst through, sent a torrent of water rushing into the town.
We do believe that there was negligence, and we do believe that this was preventable.
In a statement to News4 Investigates, CSX Railroad wrote in part, CSX track and related infrastructure is maintained and regularly inspected in accordance with CSX policies. The lawsuit seeks $450 million in damages.
It's about justice. That's what we're really seeking here, is justice.
You can see the destruction here in Waverly even 1 year later, from the tarps to the boarded up buildings. And the disaster came in the midst of a 3-year News4 investigation into why so many people across Middle Tennessee are seeing flooding now that have never seen flooding before.
Tell Boma vote no, stop more flooding. Tell Boma vote no, stop more flooding. Tell Boma vote no, stop more flooding. Tell Boma vote.
Laura Turner is frankly,
I need to take a break.
Exhausted.
Stop more flooding. Stop more flooding.
Never thinking she'd be protesting on a dry day in rain boots.
Turn around.
Carrying an umbrella.
Don't drown.
And wearing a sign because of flooding.
This is something that in my wildest dreams I couldn't imagine, because it's simply an issue of public safety.
This protest of a proposed mega housing development in a floodplain in Williamson County is a microcosm of sorts of a statewide crisis, in which a population boom in Middle Tennessee comes as old infrastructure fails.
We're being flooded, thanks to the state.
Local and state agencies fail too to act on flood prevention. And record-breaking storms intensify across the state. Problems revealed no more than in rural Humphreys County and Paul Turner's property. A storm in October 2021 brought 10 inches of water, drowning the downstairs den And flood mitigation across Highway 13 from his home is supposed to keep water away. But Turner's cell phone video and photographs show the state-operated culvert is so old it simply can't keep up.
Anything and everything was destroyed.
And down the street from Turner's home, Charles Gilreath now has to unhook a chain to even allow someone onto his driveway. This photo shows the rocks that once supported it. Now, look at how that foundation has washed away.
I don't want nobody driving down in that driveway collapsing on them.
A different state-operated culvert is too small to handle the floodwaters that cover his back porch during flooding.
Is this an example of TDOT just not planning appropriately to handle this water?
I think that's a tough question. It's not like they were put there improperly to begin with. They were old and outdated. It's too much for the culverts to handle.
And it's not just in rural parts of the state.
This isn't even the worst part of the street right now.
I spoke with a lot of neighbors in Green Hills, a neighborhood in West Nashville. Many have lived here for years and have never flooded until now.
You're not in a floodplain.
No.
You've been here for 50 years.
Right.
How often are you flooding now?
It's been 3 times this year.
They also blame outdated and too small culverts. They say for too long, the city approved 2 homes being constructed where a single home used to stand. Because they were built before 2014, none are required to have any type of stormwater control systems to make up for the loss of grass.
We have several neighborhoods that are older neighborhoods that are experiencing, stormwater concerns.
Are you fighting mistakes from the past?
It's not mistakes from the past. I think infill may play a small part in it, but we are seeing so many more stormwater complaints, mainly because of the amount of rain.
But flood experts say when green space is being paved over for construction, that's less soil to absorb rain. Consider this, the Greater Nashville Regional Council found in a 5-year period, 600,000 football fields worth of land were paved over. Using that same analogy, 575,000 football fields of tree canopy were lost.
We are getting more intense rain events because of climate change, but it's also running off faster because of the development.
And it's a similar complaint from nearby Wilson County.
We ended up getting 3 inches of water in our basement a month into living here.
All neighbors know is that as more land clears, flooding gets worse.
We've been here since '99, and it's just gotten worse and worse as the years have gone on.
News4 investigator Carice Jackman asked the Wilson County Planning Department if the new development is indeed meeting flood mitigation standards, why is flooding still happening?
If that's the case, then how is it possible that they're getting flooding in the property?
Well, the only thing I can explain in any type of layperson's details is that we're getting more intense rain events.
That's what civil engineers studying Tennessee's flood crisis are finding. It's not just that the state is seeing beyond average rainfalls. Nashville has seen that for the last 5 years, but that the storms are more intense in shorter time spans. For example, 6-inch culverts are designed to handle historic flooding of 6 inches. But what if 8 inches fell in one day, as it did in several Middle Tennessee towns in 2021? The culverts would be too small to funnel all the water through.
We can no longer continue to rely on historic data to say this is how we should be designing our infrastructures.
It's a scary trend and one that we can't escape from. But what we can do is really, take the steps now to prepare our critical infrastructure.
But taking those steps moves at a frustrating pace. Humphreys County homeowners complained to TDOT in October of 2021. It took 5 months for just the permit to widen culverts to be approved. Construction is not yet underway.
What do you say to these homeowners? Is the message right now, you're just going to have to sit and wait?
We could have gotten that permit filed sooner. Fully understand. But unfortunately, getting the permit approved has taken more time than we anticipated, and our hands are tied there.
But even after years of repeated flooding and the disaster in Waverly, Tennessee lawmakers failed to take widespread action. The group Flood Ready Tennessee drafted legislation to form a task force to identify flood risks and prioritize eligible projects for flood mitigation. But the bill never even made it out of committee, citing funding.
There's a lot of things that go across their table, I realize that. And I think until you're truly affected personally, I don't know if you ever really truly understand.
And while President Biden's infrastructure bill is supposed to provide floodwater remediation funding to states, TDOT wrote in an email that they haven't made any decisions yet on how to spend those dollars, since they're now just getting the rules. In the meantime, Gilreath will keep chaining off his driveway, remembering that even he couldn't use it during the last flood.
I was trapped. I couldn't drive across this because I was afraid it'd wash me into the creek.
We don't want to die in the middle of the night.
The loss of green space, the old infrastructure, the intensifying storms, it's all why Laura Turner and her fellow protesters are literally taking to the streets.
We're here because our neighbors are going under every time we have a fast, furious, frequent flooding event, which happens more than frequently now.
Now, Laura Turner and her fellow protesters know that flooding is a risk. They're just trying to not allow it to become worse.
But our investigation found plenty of people who live across Middle Tennessee who don't live in a floodplain are still repeatedly flooding. It's the last thing you want in your home. Raging water gushing in, your family combing through floodwaters, desperately trying to get out.
I remember getting into the water. It was so cold, so cold.
Michael Hausman and his wife Margaret remember it vividly. Their young family wading through water waist deep last March when heavy rains flooded South Nashville's Creve Hall neighborhood.
I honestly was saying every prayer I knew.
The Hausmans are near a floodplain, but aren't in it. It's the same story for these people in Manchester and Laverne. This homeowner says she was told by developers not to worry when she bought her brand new home.
They did say several times, it's not in the floodplain, it's not in the floodplain.
So News4 Investigate started digging and found the FEMA flood maps for their neighborhoods were outdated, some more than a decade old.
All of this was completely underwater. It's a major problem. I feel like we've been misled.
Do you think this home should have been built on this land at all?
Oh no, definitely not.
Because these maps are so old, does that indicate that these neighborhoods shouldn't have been built there in the first place?
That's a good question.
Mark Vieira is a senior civil engineer with FEMA, the agency responsible for the flood zone maps.
Some of the maps we found are 12 years old. Is that acceptable?
If you look at the criteria, there's a possibility, yes, that's okay.
When we first started investigating the causes in 2019, Vieira told us that while the maps may be old, they are assessed every 5 years, and local authorities can ask that a specific area be studied by FEMA at any time. But Vieira says in neither the neighborhoods in Manchester or Laverne was FEMA asked by codes departments to determine if certain flood zones had expanded.
It's their job also to look to see, is this development going to be reasonably safe from flooding?
Knowing what we uncovered about the dated maps, News4 Investigates examined the Hausmans' home and found preliminary mapping showed the floodplain had changed and they are now squarely in a flood zone.
They actually determined you're now in a floodplain.
Oh wow, that's news to me. I did not know that.
Our investigation found they weren't alone, ultimately identifying 1,000 more Nashville homes now deemed to be in floodplains that weren't before.
Well, I'm shocked, and I think, it doesn't make any sense because this isn't an area that floods often.
FEMA confirmed to News4 Investigates this year there are even more areas in Nashville and Middle Tennessee that haven't been studied for flood risk.
We haven't studied every creek ditch in every community. You can't say your house isn't going to flood. There's always that possibility.
Meanwhile, there are calls for FEMA to do better. Last year, a nonpartisan government agency released a report urging FEMA to make major improvements to their flood maps and address current and future flood hazards. Now, homeowners who have experienced the heavy toll of flooding face a difficult choice: to make modifications or leave. Melissa Fotorath decided she's had enough and moved out.
I crawled under my house about 6 weeks ago. There was standing water on the tarp, mold all on the cross beams. We've been sick for months.
And rebuilding comes with a cost. News4 Investigates once again found government decisions left flood victims unable to recover. With water rising every second, Samuel Devers, his fiance, and 2 little boys didn't know if they'd make it out of their Humphreys County home alive.
We decided that it'd probably be best to go up into our loft, and then I would sit down at the stairs with a flashlight waiting for rescue to come.
When the waters receded, figuring out how he'd pay for the floors, appliances, and his entire home became his next obstacle.
I called my insurance company and filed a claim for a flood, and they told me that I was not covered under a flood and that they would not send anybody out and pretty much not waste their time.
But even if Devers had wanted to get flood insurance, News4 Investigates found he wouldn't have been eligible for the National Flood Insurance Program because he lives in Humphreys County, which at the time of the flood did not participate in the program. Why did the county opt out?
They didn't opt out, they just never opted in.
Do you feel that not opting in back in 2010 was a mistake that the county made?
Yes, I do. As a matter of fact, we've had, I believe, 6 nationally declared disasters since 2010. None of those included an individual assistance piece, so individuals weren't qualified for FEMA relief. Now, it would have made a difference in terms of availability of subsidized flood insurance, and for that reason, I think it would have been a good idea.
Thankfully for flood victims, the county voted to opt into the program, and victims were able to retroactively get help from FEMA. But paying for insurance isn't cheap. The average cost of flood insurance for a homeowner in Tennessee is $950 a year. Something for people like Marvin Smidia, whose creek is often more dry than wet, feels like an impossible cost.
That's my worry, because I'm on a fixed income and every dime I had to account for.
Not only that, but it's a rate that could be increasing after FEMA made changes to the National Flood Insurance Program's risk rating system in the fall of 2021.
So what they're doing is they are essentially changing flood insurance from being based on where you live to being based on the specific risk that your house or property is facing.
Keep in mind, 1 foot of water could cause more than $29,000 in damage to a 1,000 square foot home. It means builders like Brady Fry say they have to take extra steps to protect the homes they're building.
So you'd be shocked at how fast water can actually get behind these systems.
So he uses specific liners and tubes to help keep the water out and underground drainage to give it somewhere to go.
We want to evacuate that water. We have foundation drains, and that carries the water under the ground away from the foundation.
But homeowners like Smidia say he simply can't afford insurance or upgrades to his house. He's among the 1,000 homeowners in Davidson County who didn't know he was in a floodplain until now. He just hopes he can find the money he needs to protect his house before it's too late.
Here in Waverly, the cleanup continues, and so will our investigations into this growing crisis. And we leave you tonight with a reminder of why there is still so much at risk.
Within 10 seconds, that's when the tidal wave of water came through. I screamed his name 3 times, and then he went under, and I never saw him again.
There's nothing that we can do. You know, say our prayers and go to bed. That's what we do.
I've been here 25 years and was here for the 2010 flood, and it's getting as bad now as it was then, just on a good thunderstorm.
You're worried about even the items that you put back in your house, the money that you spend. You're just kind of anticipating, could this happen again?
We're not doing enough, and we have to come together as a state.
When the water hit and the room filled up, that's when I lost them. I lost all of them.
It's not natural. It's not the way this wasn't supposed to happen.